Thank you all so much for coming to our April meeting. We are so excited to get to have Michael Nelson, who is the Director of Operations at Fab Lab El Paso, a really awesome fabrication lab out in West Texas, to join us today to kind of discuss their operations, their services, and what they do, as well as kind of their intersection with the disability community and makers. But first, more so just for the recording and getting it out there, I will go ahead and share my screen to inform folks that, sorry, let's see here, that we have our TTAP, shall I say, has our conference coming up on June 11th through 12th over at the Pickle Research Campus in Austin. And we'd love for folks to be able to join, geared towards disability service professionals, people with disabilities, having a wide variety of exhibitors as well as amazing speakers come to join us. So yeah, it'll be a fun time. And with that, I will stop sharing and pass it on over to Michael. Thanks so much, Michael, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Cole, for inviting me over to speak with you guys. Let me see here. I'm gonna just go ahead and share my screen here and we'll get started. All right, that should be good there, right?
Yep.
Cool. So, Fab Lab El Paso, we are a nonprofit makerspace and K through 12 STEM lab located here in El Paso, Texas. We're actually celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year since our founding as the first of its kind in the region. The closest kind of maker spaces were up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and out in like Tucson, Arizona. And then, of course, over towards your end of the neck of the woods out in San Antonio and Austin. A little bit about myself, my background. I went to UTEP, the University of Texas El Paso, and I got my degree in social studies and secondary education. I got my BA there in 2009, and I've been an informal educator since about 2011. During my college years, I did do some like tutoring and was part of this after school program with the local school district. And since then, I've always just kind of loved teaching. And so people usually are like, well, how did you go from social studies to directing a makerspace? And it's a pretty cool story. And, I could get into that a little bit here. But, if we think about social studies and like history, right? We're always studying like the use of technologies, right? Throughout the ages and how those societies use technologies, right? Either advancing warfare or medicinally or and just in general, right? And so I was always interested in like in technologies and in a previous job in the same informal education where we were working a lot with like gifted and talented students, doing curriculum and programming with them. And that was kind of right around the start of this whole STEM kind of concept. When STEM was kind of becoming a buzzword and becoming popular. And so we started working with like robotics platforms and coding platforms and the kind of first kind of desktop 3D printers, especially within like the MakerBot replicators when they started coming out. And so we started getting into those and to be able to work with our local school districts there. And then I would do a lot of like conference speaking and teacher PDs with that other organization. And that's when I came across the concept of Fab Labs. And then I realized like really quickly after that, like, oh, hey, we have a Fab Lab here in El Paso. And so I started getting involved in that with the lab, started doing some like teaching on the side, really got to know the creators, the directors of the lab here. And that's when I was offered a position. So I actually became the first full-time staff member here at Fab Lab in 2018. And so since then, since 2018, I've been kind of instrumental in really advancing our educational programming offerings, working with local school districts. And in 2019, I was awarded the STT Foundation, which is another local foundation as a STEM Educator of the Year in 2019. Aside from that, I'm a musician, an artist, heavily involved in different community programs and initiatives here in El Paso. And the Fab Lab just kind of really fits that, my lifestyle. So just a little bit about me. I've always kind of been I consider myself a maker. I like to like tinker and and do things like that. So I've always been like really hands-on. As a kid, I would like take apart things just to see how they worked. And I've always had like my own little set of tools since I was younger. And that was like really encouraging, like from my grandfather and my uncles that were also I would consider them makers as well too. So we were always like working on our homes. If there was like a plumbing issue, we would go and I would help my uncle like fix that stuff. And so I was always kind of like introduced to that, and it's just kind of a continuation of what I'm able to teach the kids now too. So Fab Lab El Paso started as a general makerspace, like what you would consider the typical run-of-the-mill makerspace community center. We started, or actually before I got there, they started with like building their own 3D printers, building their own laser cutters off of like DIY kits that, were inexpensive and accessible. This was Fab Lab El Paso was founded by a husband and wife that moved back to El Paso. Dr. Gustavo Arriaga was born and raised here in El Paso, went out to Duke University, and then went on to study at Tokyo University and got his master's in neuroscience. And his wife, Kathy Chen Arriaga, who was from New York native, they met at Duke University and they both went on to study in Tokyo University. She had her background more in design, and so they were heavily involved in maker spaces in Duke and in Tokyo. And so when they moved back to El Paso to start their family, they realized that there was no space like this here. And so they started setting it up themselves. And so for the first couple of years, it was really just them doing it as a labor of love. They kind of raised their kid as they were starting the lab. I remember going there in the early years and seeing their baby like in a little cradle there, like hanging out while they were working with the laser cutters and stuff. So it was super cool seeing that. It's kind of like a family kind of passion project. But since then, for the first couple of years, it was kind of like a standard run-of-the-mill membership model. People would come in, pay per month to have access to the tools and equipment. And they kind of really realized that it wasn't the numbers weren't like matching up. And I believe just right now before we started the call, I don't remember if it was Ron or Brian that were kind of mentioning that that their maker spaces weren't kind of profitable like that, right? And so it was a bunch of different issues. There was a lot of different things, of course, financing, right? Gyms are successful because they have a lot more people paying into memberships than actually use the facilities, right? And so here in El Paso, we were kind of got this like uphill because there wasn't any concept like this before. Like we were kind of like the first to kind of introduce these concepts, like, oh, this is a lab, this is 3D printers, these are laser cutters. And so having a membership model kind of infers that you have people that are knowledgeable to use those equipment, right? And so that know safe operations, that know digital design, that know how to create files to operate those machines, right? And so what we wound up noticing or like realizing is people had like the interest, or they were like, oh, hey, I want to like 3D print this baby Yoda head. Okay, cool. But do they actually know how to operate a 3D printer in a mixed use environment? Right. So we were kind of quickly realizing that Gus and Kathy were spending a lot of time actually teaching people how to use the equipment correctly and properly. And once people like were using them on their own, we were always constantly having to fix those machines because people would not take care of the machines, right? It was kind of a thing. Oh, I got to use the printer, cool. Would they clean up, or oh, would they put tools back, or right? So it was kind of like this kind of tricky situation. Like, all right, so people are interested, but it's a lot of time, it's a lot of effort. We need a lot of volunteers kind of coming in. We need to like have everything like well documented and like little tests where people could like get qualified to like operate in this environment. And what was always really awesome about our space were our workshops. And so ever since the beginning, we always had like really cool, interesting STEAM-based workshops where kids of all ages, not just kids, adults participated as well too. And those are actually some of our more popular workshops would get hands-on and learn and create using cool creative technologies. And so what we kind of did it was right when I was coming on board to the Fab Lab, so 2017, 2018, we made a big pivot. So we went away from the membership model and we focused solely on our educational programming. So since then, we've been become partners in education with a majority of the local school districts, and we offer field trips and workshops to the schools. So they come down to our facility. We run programs with them. We're also vendors with the district, so we're able to provide professional development to their staffs. We're able to go out onto campuses, and we're able to do workshops with them as well too. And all throughout that, we really heavily focus on engaging STEM. Things like that we're going to talk about right now is like within accessibilities, but creativity, innovation, product development, in addition to, of course, like the technical skills in coding and robotics and 3D design, right? And a lot of that is even through like product design, which we'll get into a little bit within some of our challenges that we do. But we're also we really heavily try to focus on like minority groups in education. So we, being here in El Paso, we're predominantly Hispanic population. So we do a lot of programs, and especially for our female audiences. So a lot of the programs that we run are specifically for females and specifically for Hispanic females, to be able to increase those numbers of STEM and STEAM participation within those career fields. And so we kind of like bring the fun of making to these populations and to our populations. And we found the success in there. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't operate as a makerspace still, right? If you were to see the space, there's tools and equipment all over the place. We have our classroom facility, but then we also have our fabrication shop. So we still offer fabrication as a service. And so if you need something 3D printed, shoot us over the file, we'll print it out. If you need something laser cut, shoot us over the file. We have my fabrication engineer that is a master maker, and he will work on the projects, right? Part of that kind of the reason why we went away from that model also too is insurance is crazy. So being a nonprofit and being like a kind of within that startup, kind of mentality, insurance is like super expensive. So if you have people operating like $10,000 laser cutters or like $12,000 CNC machines, it's a little crazy. So we kind of really went away from that and have a trained staff that operates the machine safely and effectively, but's able to provide fabrication at a below average rate for fabrication for the region. So it's still accessible, right? And then thinking about other means of production or other facilities within the region, there's businesses that do injection molding, but they're going to be doing like $10,000, 10,000 part minimums, right? Whereas here we're able to do like rapid prototyping and small batch prototyping or small batch end use parts as well too. So kind of that's where we're at within the fabrication stuff. So starting from the initial lab with Kathy and Gus, you can kind of see there's Gus right over here and there's Kathy right there. This was our first location. It was a small, super small makerspace. We kind of, like I said, built everything from scratch. Then in 2016, we were invited to open up a new facility, our current home, at the Roderick Art Space Lofts. And so the art space is a concept that's nationwide, and they kind of work within different environments, but the concept is like a living space for artists and creatives, that's like accessible housing. At least within our facility, it's partnered with Housing and Urban Development to provide low cost, affordable housing for artists and creatives. Um, that are low income. And so we were like an anchor tenant on the bottom floor of this complex. And so there was a cafe, There was Fab Lab El Paso, and there was three, four other kind of suites that were available for artists and creatives to kind of like do startup businesses, and then a gallery space. And so we were invited to be an anchor tenant here to be able to operate Fab Lab El Paso and then also operate a shared space workshop for the artists and residents. And so that's kind of currently where we're at right now. In 2019, we launched the city's first mobile makerspace. So that's our mobile lab right here. And that was at the end of 2019. And so we were only able to operate this bus for a couple months before the pandemic. So right at the start of course, in 2020, we had to kind of park the bus. We had to kind of halt operations, and we pivoted to PPE fabrication. And so within a few short weeks notice, we were already hopping on the calls with the international Fab Lab organizations and networks to share files, share designs, see what other labs are doing. And we started prototyping different face masks. We worked with local dentists to create different types of face shields. Some local firefighters that were needing adapters for their face masks to have like stopgap PP, filter systems placed in there. And all in all, within the face shield realm, we produced over 5,000 pieces of PPE face shields, and that were either donated or like bought by organizations like that just to cover the cost of materials so we could continue producing on there. And so, kind of coming out of the pandemic, that's when we kind of started getting into some new things, right? And so in 2022, we were designated as a NASA community anchor site through their Office of STEM. And this was the inaugural grant cohort of 21 sites around the nation of informal learning facilities. And so this included planetariums and museums and other like organizations like that. We were the only Fab Lab, we were the only makerspace with that designation. Now they're in cohort three. They're just getting ready to announce cohort three. And to my knowledge, we're still the only makerspace in Fab Lab with that designation. So within our grant designation, we were able to provide 8 workshops throughout the year in 2022, all about NASA STEM and STEAM topics. And so we kind of brought like the maker education into NASA STEM content and really had some really cool workshops. Because of the work that we were doing, our grant managers provided another opportunity to us, which you see here on the screen. And so we were invited to pilot the Students to Launch in this initiative, which was kind of like a kickoff to the Artemis 1 mission launch in 2022. And so it was an additional workshop that we talked about the Artemis 1 program. We had a propulsion systems engineer from Boeing come down, give a guest presentation to our kids, and the students that participated, 30 students that participated, were eligible to then receive an all expense paid by VIP trip to the Kennedy Space Center to witness a launch, hence Students to Launch. And so this is a program that was sponsored by the AIAA, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. And so, yeah, we ran that program. 30 of our kids participated. It was super cool. And then a couple months later, they were like, all right, hey, we have the SpaceX Crew 5 launch happening in October. How many kids can you bring? Let's get permission slips. Let's get things set up. There was going to be 4 of my staff that were going to be able to go. So we were like, all right, let's take 5 kids per staff member. We'll take 20 kids. And so we reached out to the kids. We had 19 students actually return permission slips and forms, and their parents were cool with us taking their kids all the way to Florida. And then one of the hurricanes kind of came through. That mission got scrubbed, and so we were like days away from leaving, and we were like super bummed. But then just kind of like the stars aligned, and a couple weeks later, they came back to us and they were like, Artemis 1 is scheduled for November. Like, are you guys still able to go? We're like, hell yeah, we're able to go. Like, let's do it. So we got all the kids permission slips again. and like they were okay to leave from like their schools and everything, and we got to witness the Artemis 1 launch, which at the time was the world's largest, most powerful rocket launch, up until recently with the Starlink, the SpaceX launch just a couple weeks ago. So yeah, that was us going to the Kennedy Space Center. We got to meet astronauts. We got to have a VIP viewing area at the Banana Creek Complex, and it was just amazing. Like just that whole experience was like a highlight of my educational, like professional career, to say the least. And kind of as part of that, we were also invited to NASA STEM conferences for 2 years, called the Better Together conferences, where we were able to, myself and my director, Kathy, participate with NASA OSTEM in their yearly educational conferences. So we got to rub elbows and shoulders with other NASA STEM grantees from universities that are Murup funded to other like community anchors. And our participation in those two programs, those two conferences, really just kind of cemented the work that we're doing, right, within the educational realm. We're doing NASA level content and programming here with our students. And vice versa. We're sharing, we're passing out information that we're doing with others, and this is really cool. So totally highlight of my professional career right there. Like I kind of mentioned, like all throughout our programs and our K through 12 workshops and content programming, we really focus on trying to create empathetic learners and to kind of foster innovative lifelong learning, right? As makers, we're always learning, right? If we come into a problem, if we don't know how to do something, we research it and we find out how to do it, or we come across like ways like, oh hey, like I want to make this, how do I use laser cutter? We learn how to use that, right? Or oh, I'm cutting this new material, I need to go through these processes to test out the material and we cut that, right? So we really try to do that and like model that in our educational programs, and we do this like starting, typically our programs go third grade to high school. We also do some stuff for the littles here and there. But even as early as like third grade, we have kids modeling and like operating the 3D printers, and we're showing them how to do that. They're getting hands-on. We're like, all right, push this button, set this file, boom. You just started your first 3D print. And they like walk away with the print of like a 15-minute print that they made, and that just like you just see that spark in their imagination and their like pride and wow, I just made this with this machine. So we really try to do that for the kids. But throughout within fabrication in general, just in the makerspace, we've had a series of different initiatives and programs that we've been a part of to promote accessibility within our community. So right before the pandemic in 2019, we were approached by the El Paso Council of the Blind to prepare for the 2020 election, general election, and creating these poll pad iPad covers. And so my fabrication engineer worked with the council in developing a iPad cover that you see here that had Braille CNC cut, and this was kind of like it was basically a PETG acrylic sheet that had cutouts for check boxes or signature lines for iPads for voting. And so throughout the kind of start of the pandemic, leading up to the 2020 general election, he produced, I don't remember how many vote, but it was a ton of these. And so these went out to all the different voting polling locations in El Paso. And that was a pretty huge effort. And so that took a lot of effort, just kind of even like dialing in the Braille dimensions, getting specialized drill bits for cutting CNC Braille. And so that was a huge endeavor. But it was super rewarding and it was kind of cool. When I went to go vote, I saw the pad like devices right there. I was like, hey, we made those. And so that was pretty cool to see that. Then right around that same time, we had a young volunteer. She was a junior going into her senior year of high school, Wendy. She's right here. And she started volunteering at the lab, just kind of hanging out, helping us with workshops, helping us around. And, she was a tinker, a maker, a hobbyist. And she kind of came to us and she was like, hey, you know what? I got this friend and like we're best friends and I want to like make something for her. And we're like, well, okay, cool. What do you want to do? And she was like, well, she's kind of started telling me her backstory. And she was like, well, I want to make this like arm like to attach to my friend's wheelchair that she'd be able to control. She, excuse me, she has double deficiencies on her arms and legs. And she uses a wheelchair and she controls it with like a joystick, like a joystick. And so she had this idea of like creating this like robotic arm attachment for her. And so we were like, cool, yeah, of course you could do that here at the lab, we'll support you in whatever we can. I have access to two engineers, pick their brains. You could print whatever. If we need to order materials, we'll talk about that. We'll see what we could do. And so what wound up happening is we saw this as like a fantastic opportunity to kind of highlight the skills and the possibilities of what's capable in a fab lab and specifically our fab lab. And so my director, Kathy, she was like, hey, let's document this. Like, let's kind of put together a team and let's like follow this journey and let's, see where it goes. And so we worked with a local professor of communications at UTEP and an artist from Ciudad Juarez, Alejandra. And we kind of like collaborated on documenting this project. And there was a film festival that was coming up. It was the Tribeca Film short documentary, Tribeca Film Shorts. And so we submitted the documentary to it and wound up getting first place. And so we got like an extension. We got to work with Tribeca Films on like actually completing the short documentary. And that got submitted to other film festivals, as you can see here. It won the NALEC Legacy Award in 2020 and a couple of different documentaries. And I do have links to this slide, so I'll share that with you guys. And so that way you could watch these as well too. So this is kind of it's a documentary and it's kind of more of a like a growing of age kind of story, like documenting these two young girls kind of pass in their senior year. Yeah, it's about, the challenges growing up here on the border, identifying as a female Latina, identifying as a female Latina with a disability, even too, but kind of like their coming of age story within that concept of the project. We wrote some grants, we got some funding for materials, and part of that grant was to be able to provide workshops to teach local high school students accessible design, especially within like prosthetics and aids. And so at that time, I was working with Wendy, and she was working on the arm, the robotic arm project. But then she was going to assist me in creating content for workshops. And so around that time, we ran into the Makeable Challenge by Print Lab. And so in October 2020, we kicked off the Makeable Challenge, kind of in collaboration with the Robotic Arm Project and like with this accessibility design challenge called Print Lab. And so we hosted a series of workshops. This was at the height of the pandemic. Students were remote. We had six high schools actually sign up, participate in the workshops, but we had one team actually submit. And so you could see from October to April, it was a long-term project. We had one team actually submit a submission to the international challenge, and they got on the short list of finalists for their age group and category. So we were like blown away. We were super excited about that. But then, so kind of going out of there and coming up, if you guys aren't unaware, Print Lab is a UK-based 3D printing curriculum and resource, and they partnered with Autodesk to host this challenge. And it's all about students and adults as well too. They opened up an adult category the second year to create accessible devices for individuals with mobility issues. Initially, it was specifically within their hands, but then they opened it up in future years for all disabilities. And so, what we did is like the last 2 years, we've also worked on our own submissions, and we worked with to try to get involvement within local middle school, high schools to get involved within the challenges. And so this is where Waiska enters the picture. So Waiska Rodriguez, she came to the lab one day, just I was here by myself. And then like I get a knock at the door, I go check it out, and this woman, Waiska Rodriguez, she was like, "Hey, I train, I'm a triathlete. I bike by your facility like all the time, and I see the window display of your 3D printers, and I've seen and heard that people print prosthetics with 3D printers." And she was like, "I'm in need of one." And I was like, "Okay, cool. Let's see what we can do for you." And I was like, we sat down, we kind of stopped and got to know a little bit more about her and her backstory. She's at the time was 40, 43 years old. But she's from Venezuela, and she migrated here to the United States to pursue her athletic career in the para triathlon. And so prior to her amputations, she was a water polo player on the Olympic team in Venezuela in the 90s. And then around 19, that's when she suffered meningitis, and it became a serious case. And they wound up having to amputate her right leg and her right arm and some of her left digits, her left hand digits. And but since then, she didn't let that stop her. She continued her athletic career. As you can see, she goes on like crazy excursions, and she loves to be outdoors, loves to hike and ice climbs and like all kinds of crazy stuff. So she's just like a superwoman. It's like super inspirational. Just being in the same room with her, just talking, right? And so what we wound up doing is we kind of she was really looking for an assistive device to help her within the triathlon, to help her on the bicycle portion. Like she could swim cool, she could run cool, she's got a running prosthetic, but she was really like needing something for the bicycle to for her right arm to connect to the right handlebar. And so we kind of started myself, and this project was really myself and my STEM education teacher, Elizabeth. She's a mechanical engineer by trade. And so this was actually like one of the first kind of like real world problems Elizabeth was facing post graduating from UTEP. And so we kind of started working with her. We had a couple months. We since we met Waiska to the Make Able deadline. And so what we documented was that first couple months of us working with her. And so we submitted this entry to the second year of Make Able, and we won two places, best use of uh, best empathy and design and showcase of customization. And so we were like blown away. We are like, oh my God, like we won two places in this international contest. And we didn't like even produce anything like of good value. Like we were barely working through it. We're trying to understand this like complex problem, and you could see that here in the video submission as well too. And so we continued working with Waiska into this the third year of Make Able, and what we kind of pivoted towards was a concept of a makeathon. And so we were like, okay, well, we're stuck. We need more help. Let's involve the community, right? And so what we did is opened up the lab to 3 days of making. And so we kicked off with a meet and greet. We had Weiska come down. I reached out to her bicycle fitter. So she has a local bike tech that fit her prosthetic for the bicycle, right? And so he came down, he gave a lecture on like Weiska's stats and like her physical kind of her data that they analyze through his like systems where they do the bike fitting. And then we had a local professor from UTEP in the he's a the physical therapist. And so he came down to talk about kind of like the muscle structures and like how athletes, and the prosthetics kind of work. And so we had a group of kind of individuals come down with different skill sets, different backgrounds. We had some engineers, we had some kind of just like fabrication guys, we had some guys that were like a little bit more into like coding and stuff. And we worked on this problem over 3 days. We came up with a couple different solutions. We had some kind of working teams that kind of worked together to kind of start lo-fi prototyping. We started busting out some 3D prints. We started busting out some laser cuts, some basic designs. And then we came up with three kind of viable solutions that we submitted for this round of Makeable. And so you can view that submission here. And once again, to our surprise, we were awarded as a best showcase of best showcase of empathy. And so that third year, it was like, man, we took another kind of award here. And so since then, we kind of developed one of the concepts, and so this is kind of where we're at right now. So this is kind of allows her to easily click in and out of the handlebars. Due to World Triathlon regulations, the user cannot be connected to the bicycle and the user at the same time. And so we're kind of like in this kind of, okay, she has to bail, she has to have this quick release mechanism, but she has to also be able to like click in and out easily. We modified her ice pick, which you saw in that other photo. So this was already like a professional like carbon fiber fitted for her arm. And then so we kind of like retrofitted that to have this adaptation. And then so the big part of it was actually figuring out the handlebar attachment. And so this is kind of the working prototype right now. She's submitting that to to the U.S. triathlon committees for reviews before we go on for like further iterations right there. Also, I'm working with Waiska to on modifying some finger extensions for her left hand. And this is one of our kind of like prototypes and tests of that system. This was a version of the Danger Finger that's available on like Thingiverse. And there's a couple other makers that had created these finger extensions here. So once again, like I'm not the like best engineer or like the best designer, and so I'm kind of like working with her on that, making some tweaks, making some modifications, then going testing and going back and forth with her on that. But based on these like first couple tests, this was actually like the second prototype, and they're working pretty good. We really just have to figure out the kind of the cable system here to attach to her wrist, because yeah, like these, I mean, we've seen photos and videos of people using them like really well, but the cables kind of like they kind of like shift from her knuckles and like it's not very effective. So we're trying to figure out almost like a glove type of system to make that a better fit for her. Then throughout the end of last year, Waiska went along with me to a couple different schools to talk about the Make Able Challenge. There was like this campus, for example, who were working on a Make Able submission. So we got to review their submission. Waiska got to talk to them about herself, her athletic career, and her athletic goals. And then we also had a school come down to the lab to do a 3D printing workshop. And we wound up taking their like our basic general 3D printing workshop for the year, but then modifying it into like a challenge for the students to make an arm extension for Waiska. So she's an awesome human being. She loves working with the kids and just seeing like their creativity and like pushing them to think of, a little bit differently about about making, right? They're like, hey, you could actually, yeah, you could use a 3D printer to make some cool little Pokemon like figurines, but you could also use a 3D printer to help somebody's life, right? So, in addition to these, we've kind of my like last thing that I have to talk about with you guys is our museum projects. So we've we have connections within El Paso within There's a network of culture. It's called a cultural roundtable, and it's a network of cultural organizations, nonprofits, museums, et cetera, that really are looking at like, all right, how do we promote El Paso culture? How do we promote Hispanic culture on the border, specifically within our cultural institutions? And so within these networks, and also too, Fab Lab El Paso is located in downtown in the arts district. We're like walking distance from the public library, from the history museum, for the art museum, and so we've collaborated with multiple institutions on different projects, fabricating for the El Paso Art Museum, fabricating for UTEP's Rubin Center Museum, and this project came to us within the History Museum. So they were looking at providing a summer camp um, where we co-taught the students, high school students, for half of the day. Half of the day would work with the history museum on like exhibitions and curatorial kind of concepts, and then with the end goal to create a specific exhibition with accessibility in mind. So our end of our half of the day, we worked with the students on 3D scanning, 3D printing, and digital design. And so we kind of went back and forth with the students on that. We chose certain artifacts that we would then scan and render and create 3D printed replicas of. In turn, the students would create this accessible museum exhibition. And so here we could see we're working with the curatorial staff in the History Museum to scan. This is a pottery vessel from the region from about 1200 years ago. And then here's that scan where the students were detailing and touching up that scan data. The students also scanned themselves to be into 3D printable busts of the students, in turn that they were also going to be in part of the exhibition. So here is a Navajo rug. And this one, of course, we couldn't scan to print to scale, but this was how it was displayed on the museum, and this was how it was printed. And then here was the actual exhibition. So they had the artifacts in display in glass cases, like you normally would in a museum, but they also had the artifacts that were printed in front of the displays. So they would be tactile things that people with visual impairments or just anybody in general could pick up and touch and interact with. And then, like I said, the students actually had themselves as part of the exhibit with their 3D busts. The students also learned how to laser cut, and they did some research background information on the artifacts that they were scanning. And then we took little oral histories of themselves and them telling the stories about the artifacts that were on scannable QR codes. And so anybody with with a phone or a visual impairment could scan that QR code and hear what that artifact is. And so there's kind of like multiple facets to this exhibit right here. And so kind of likewise along the same lines, we worked with the archaeology museum to digitize and reproduce a couple items that were on loan from White Sands. So just north of here from El Paso, a couple, like about an hour and a half, 2 hours up, is the White Sands National Monument and Missile Range. And recently they've discovered footprints of dating back to the last ice age from about 15,000 years of humans. And so down here at the bottom, this kind of orange one, this is a cast of a toddler's footprint from about 15,000 years ago. And so these were on loan. And so they wanted to kind of like make replicas of that. And so since they're fragile casts, we didn't want to actually go through like a casting, like to reverse engineer them and actually make molds and casts and all that. And so we 3D scanned them and 3D printed exact replicas to scale. And then, so this one is super interesting, and this was like very important for the museum to have record of. Is this is a giant three-toed sloth with a human footprint on top of it, like in it at the same time. So this does a lot for the archaeological record within the region to date humans and giant sloths in the same region in this area when it was swamps, right around the time when the ice age was happening. So this was a super cool project where we were able to, not necessarily for accessibility, but it is part of their permanent exhibit, and it would be a tactile learning artifact that they had for to save that right there since they were just on loan. So kind of coming up, the next kind of big steps for Fab Lab El Paso is for the past 6 years, ever since I've been here, so almost, yeah, 6, 7 years. We've been working with the city and the El Paso Community Foundation on a world-class children's museum and science center. And so we were invited to become partners with the museum and to run the makerspace that was being planned for the museum. And so right now, over the past couple of years, my fabrication engineer has been, in addition to all the other random projects and crazy stuff that we got going on, he's been creating our new space. So we have like slot walls and cubby storages and maker benches and furniture. And so he actually just got one of the last big pieces of furniture picked up today, heading over to the museum. And now we're also working on this giant like interactive circuit wall for the space. And within the next couple months, we'll be actually moving into that space to start doing some like soft openings and testing out our new home for K through 12 maker education. And so this is going to be an extension to the accessible work that we're doing. One of the first big projects that we're collaborating on within the museum is going to be another Makeathon style event. But the museum is looking for tactile displays for visually impaired to navigate around the museum. So we have some different basic ideas on that, but the main thing is that we're going to be kind of co-creating alongside some of our partners. We are partnered with Autodesk, um, and they have an initiative that we got a grant for to work with their engineers on project, like on a specific project. And so the project that we're pitching is this Makeathon. So we're going to have those Autodesk engineers come down to La Nube. We're going to work with some local high school, college level kids on the task of creating accessible tactile maps or manipulatives, learning manipulatives for La Nube specifically. So that's going to be and that's kicking off in July, hopefully. So we got a couple months to kind of get that planned and ready to go. So that's kind of our trajectory at the moment here at Fab Lab. So that's kind of what I have for you guys. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And like I said, I have this on a link that you guys can check out. So I'm going to share that here with you guys as well too.
And Michael, would I be okay to also like I put that in, share it when I post the YouTube recording as well?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic. Thank you.
I'm ready to move.
I know, Ron.
I
Ron, this
haven't
is right up
considered
your
El
alley.
Paso
I
before.
was watching your excitement on your face, Ron. It was really cool. A couple comments, and I put one in the chat, Michael, because you
Yes,
kind
ma'am.
of talked about those
Oh, you know
two
what? I wasn't
projects.
able to see the chat. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I
No.
hadn't seen the
I'll
chat
tell you.
since then.
So what I was saying is, you talked about like the two girls and how it was not successful, but I look at it
Mhm,
as very successful
mhm,
because you're still learning from those, and you never know where those girls are going to take that information. Me
mhm,
coming
mhm,
from someone who dropped out of school the first time I went as a biology major, and then I came back around and now I'm a speech pathologist. So, there's some
mhm,
developmental things, but you won't take away that foundation that you gave both of them. So
mhm, mhm,
I look at it as the successes, those experiences you're providing. And rolling around in my head with the fabrication, I like where you're going, and some considerations that I would have would be let's target some low incidence learners, like some of your kids in self-contained classes. So one of the projects that they talked about with the new National Ed Tech Plan, the new National Ed Tech Plan is really talking about doing what you're doing, but across the whole United States, which means we're not just putting people on computers to do pencil paper tasks. It's basically not taking what many people consider in schools. It used to be, let's not give kids worksheets. And so basically they transition those worksheets into using a computer, but you're still doing worksheet kind of projects versus this start to finish problem-based learning that you're providing. And the fact that you're able to take it down to that third grade level and then bring it up to that college level, that's really huge. And then you can almost take it a step further. Many of our students that come out of special education, whether they have what you would call a low incidence disability, which would be someone with cerebral palsy with really significantly impaired versus, or somebody even they would consider a child with Down syndrome versus a high incidence disability, somebody who just has a learning disability. And many times you have fake learning disabilities because of that bilingual, that unidentified bilingual component where kids don't have good education, so they're labeled learning disabled when in fact they really just don't have the language for participating in old-fashioned educational settings. Whereas then you then open up that opportunity for this huge problem-based learning where you're working with so many domains. So I think that's really good.
Yeah, that's kind of along the language concept right there. La Nube is going to be totally bilingual, so that's going to be a huge thing for us right now. And so we're actually looking at new staff that is like bilingual, to be able to provide those opportunities, those learning opportunities in both languages. So that's going to be a huge thing throughout the whole entire museum. And it's not just like English and Spanish. It's like they're alternating in different areas. So some things are Spanish primarily, and then English is the secondary. So it's really cool the way they're even like thinking about just displays and titling within the museum right there.
How do you, when you do bring in, so I've got a couple questions for when you're doing this make-a-thon and you are getting those adult participants, how do you bring in those participants?
So for like example, the first one that we did, we just put out the call, social media. We have an event page, we have a sign up form. We share it with our different our community partners. We reach out to community partners that sponsor events. So especially within like UTEP, there's different departments that we have closer connections to than others, of course, as a small nonprofit outside of the university. It's kind of hard to work with the university at times, but we have kind of like our connections within that they share the information and pass the information along to their students. And so we found some students kind of come down for that. Others were just kind of people that already
Because you
follow us
had
on
people
social
my
media.
age. I was noticing you had people my age, and I'm like, bring it on. So
Yeah. No, we had, it's just kind of, it was open to the community. It wasn't like an age requirement thing on that. But yeah, Dr. Boye, he was, I'm assuming he's probably close to your age, right around there.
right
And that's
around
probably who you
30.
saw. Yeah, right around there. Around there. And so,
Um,
yeah, and so he was a invaluable invaluable member of the team right there for his expertise.
I'm glad you're in Texas and I like what you're doing. And I can't wait to get more of this going in other cities in Texas, which I think is possible. What would you say if you had to list like 3 barriers from start until now, what would you say the biggest barriers in pushing forward were for you?
So always like funding, of course, as a nonprofit, that's a big one. You know, we're always looking for grants and programming there. The I think the other big one, I don't know if I could do 3, but right off the top of my head is the concept of an accessible device is kind of crazy for people. They're like, what? And so that's where, excuse me, programs and initiatives like make it more accessible for people just to understand what that concept is. Like, oh,
Mhm.
okay, well, we're familiar with it, and especially I don't know, I think of um like the infomercials were like, oh, do you suffer from this, or oh, there's this device and this product. So that the concept is out there. It's been there for dozens of years that people make devices to help
Right,
with,
right.
with things.
Well,
And if you
OTs have
go to
been doing
like
it for years and years.
And you go to Walgreens and you see like the giant pill holders or like
Yeah,
the things that will help open up, water bottles and things like that.
yeah.
But then, I think people just have a disconnect from there. It's like, oh, that's a product, that's a thing that's already a thing. And now it's like, oh, we could actually do that ourselves. If I realize my grandma has a hard time doing something, I could use some basic skills in CAD and my knowledge of 3D printing to make something to help her, to make her life easier. So I think that's part of the big learning thing. And that's kind of one of the big things that we always like go back to is like, this is the concept, this is the thing. And yeah, you can make yourself too. You can make something for somebody else to help their life, make it easier. So even like when we had like just when we were promoting the Makeathon, we really had to like explain kind of like what it is, like even then it was like people showed up and they were like, so what is it actually that we're gonna try to do? And so even just like explaining the concept is kind of is kind of a not a uphill battle, I'd say, but it takes the educational kind of like, hey, this is what it is, this is what you could do, this is how it could help somebody else, right?
I think we're really inundated with this because this is our profession, but you forget that we're a very small piece of the rest of the world that is still learning about this accessibility thing. What would you
Mhm.
say your two biggest accomplishments have been from start to finish?
Within the
Your
accessible
program, yeah.
program, yeah. So definitely, I think the museum, like the art museum,
Mhm. The
project was,
collaboration.
yeah, that collaboration was awesome. Like, just kind of going back on that project, I recently went to the museum a couple weeks ago, and those artifacts are part of their permanent collection. And
Mhm.
like it's there, like it's next to the artifacts. That the one exhibition that we did with the students is gone. Like that stuff's out. But we also scanned about six other artifacts like alongside those. And we scanned those six artifacts. It took a little bit more time, but those artifacts are still there. And so that is kind of like a lasting legacy of that project. And it's like, wow, it's like super cool that's still there in the museum. And then I think even though we're still working with Maiska, also like just that partnership was amazing. Like just meeting her, it was like super serendipitous. Like, right, she just came to the lab one day. If she didn't come to the lab, we would have never met her. And it's kind of crazy because yeah, sometimes I do see her like drive like bike by the lab. And if I didn't know her, like I would just like, oh, is somebody biking by the lab. Like I have no idea. But just the fact that she took the time and effort to come to like the space, talk to us, and now it's like 2 years later, and we're still working with her. We still have like that relationship, and she comes by the lab just to visit and say hi sometimes. So I think just that whole her project is amazing.
Yeah, and you bring what's interesting is your location is really important. You have a storefront and you have
Mhm,
visibility, and people can look
mhm,
in.
mhm, mhm.
Look in that situation, it was because she looked in through the window and saw 3D printers that it got her into it. So
Yeah,
many maker
definitely.
spaces are hidden away in warehouses that you'd never
Mhm.
know unless you're part of the community.
Yeah, exactly. And so kind
That's
of
I
just
like
kind of
how I really really like how you're integrated with this
kind
arts
of
area. That's a really
pan around here if you guys can
yeah.
kind of see this. So
That's a
yeah, this
great,
is
great
our giant window
concept.
display. So we have 3D printed vases up the top. We have the row of like 3D printers, and like a big sign that says Fab Lab El Paso, right? And
Right.
so that's kind of part of the reason it's super visible. That's
Yeah.
why we also want to keep this space. while we go to the Children's Museum, we still want to keep this space because it is such a great location.
Absolutely. We are a few minutes past 4:30, so does anyone else have any last minute questions or comments for Michael?
It's fantastic. I mean, this is really, really great work you're doing.
I
Really,
agree.
Thank you. Thank you.
very impressive.
I think just the pivot to focusing on education for children is just like a really great way to build capacity and or around STEM awareness in the community for sure.
And I'm always going to say, I want more. I want more. Let's keep it going. I have one more comment, which you hit the nail on the head, and they've done some research. Whenever they do projects where they pair non-disabled peers with the disabled partners, and they're doing these maker activities, every single one says one of the greatest benefits is the relationships that happen because of those. Because a lot of these kids, and I would agree when, what is her name again? I can't pronounce it.
Waiska.
Waiska.
Mhm.
Well, what I see the biggest thing is look at what everybody thinks of Olympics as Special Olympics and not Paralympics, and how really grueling those sports are. And now all of these people are getting a chance to meet someone, which is going to just build that desire to be, I don't know, more ingrained with that community. So by her coming in, I think you give them an opportunity to see that, these are real people with real lives. And I kudos to that. I think that's the coolest thing ever. So thank you so much. All right, take it away, Cole.
No problem. Thank you. I think even more amazing is there's 3 Nelsons on the line. Like, how random
Yes,
is that? That's super
indeed.
cool.
Absolutely.
I just
There are
noticed
many
that.
of us.
Yeah.
Indeed. But Michael, thank you so much for taking the time today. And just really great because we had Nico, Shan, and I were able to get a call with you earlier and learn so much, but like we've learned so much more now about what y'all are doing out in El Paso, and it's just really great to know. And hopefully, as Shane was saying, we kind of have more and more of this pop up, more of these kinds of centers pop up, and the
I
rest of
think
Texas.
more relationships around this and more ideas to
Mhm.
help these ideas grow so that we've got more people.
Yeah.
I think a lot like Ron's here. I think we still have Jake's here. So these are all people that want to be moving in that direction. And I think we've got a lot of a lot of potential.
Absolutely. And it's just a
Mhm.
phenomenal
Yeah.
model.
So we're going to
Yeah,
keep pushing
definitely.
forward, chipping away.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and so I shared the information of the
Yes.
slide deck right there,
Okay.
so you all have access to that. There is our contact info. Please follow us on Instagram or Facebook to stay up to date with what we got going on. And best wishes to everybody. If there's ever anything that you guys could need from us, please feel free to reach out. And especially once we're finally done with the process of moving, it's going to open the doors for us to do a lot more projects like this in the future. So definitely we'll be in contact.
Awesome.
Thank you,
very
Michael.
much, y'all. Appreciate it. Hope
And
you guys
thanks
have a
everyone
great-
for joining in.
Yes,
the
hope
3
you have a great rest of
Nelsons.
your day. And thanks so much, y'all. Thank you, Michael.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, y'all.